Kosuke Nozaki was born in 1941 in Wakayama, Japan, in a middle-class family running a liquor business. He was one of 7 siblings in a household that was always busy with the family business. With so many children to look after, his parents couldn't supervise them all closely, and Kosuke grew up with minimal oversight. He made the most of that freedom, though not always in ways his parents might have approved of. He had a reputation as a bully, someone other students learned to avoid. From a young age, he was a confident child who knew exactly what he wanted from life, and what he wanted was money. His grades reflected his lack of interest in school, consistently poor across every subject. Eventually, he dropped out and joined the family business. Working in the family liquor store, Kosuke discovered something important about himself. He had a real knack for business, a natural talent that had gone unnoticed in the classroom. He could read customers, understand what they wanted, make them feel valued. The store thrived under his attention. Stock moved faster. Regular customers became more loyal. His parents noticed the difference he was making and rewarded him with pocket money on top of his regular wages. After his parents died, Kosuke inherited the family assets. Whether he shared any of it with his 6 siblings remains unclear. What is certain is that he didn't stick with the traditional path his parents had laid out. In his 20s, he found an unusual line of work that would change his life. He became a door-to-door salesman, selling condoms. In Japan at that time, contraceptives were rarely used, and it was an uncomfortable subject for many people to discuss. What others might have seen as an embarrassing or difficult job, Kosuke saw as an opportunity. He was good at convincing people, and not before long, he was making more money than he'd ever imagined possible. By his 30s, Kosuke had accumulated enough capital to try something new. He moved to Tokyo and became a moneylender. It was risky, often dealing with desperate people, but the returns were substantial. Kosuke also dabbled in other ventures, buying and selling scrap metal, investing in properties here and there. These side businesses didn't initially bring in as much money as his lending operation, but his real estate investments eventually took off. Properties he'd bought cheaply appreciated dramatically. Areas he'd gambled on became desirable. Money started flowing in at a rate he'd never experienced before, elevating him to a position of considerable wealth and influence. But Kosuke's love for money was matched only by his passion for something else entirely: young, beautiful women. In 2016, when he turned 75, he published an autobiography that would make him famous throughout Japan. The book was titled Don Juan of Kishu, the man who gave 3 billion yen to 4,000 beautiful women. In the book, Kosuke claimed that over the course of his life, he had been intimate with 4,000 women. He wrote that he had spent roughly $27.5 million on them, buying them clothes, jewelry, holidays, whatever they wanted. He was completely open about his motivations. "The reason I make money is to date attractive women," he wrote. "I have no interest in cars or houses. Instead, I have a boundless desire to sleep with beautiful women. It will never change, and there is no retirement age." The book became a bestseller. People were fascinated by Kosuke's shameless honesty. Weekly magazines and television programs began referring to him as Don Juan. He became a minor celebrity, known across Japan for his unconventional lifestyle. By 2017, at the age of 77, Kosuke was looking to settle down. He wanted to spend his later years in relative peace, preferably with a wife by his side. He had married at least twice before, but both marriages ended in divorce. In early 2018, Kosuke was at Tokyo's Haneda Airport when he encountered a young woman. Her name was Saki Sudo, a woman 55 years his junior. Kosuke, struck by Saki's beauty, orchestrated what appeared to be a chance encounter. He pretended to fall in front of her, playing the part of a frail old man who needed assistance. It worked. Saki helped him up, and they began talking. They exchanged contact details, and Kosuke began pursuing her. He offered her money, as he had with so many other women. He asked her out on a date that very night. To his delight, she accepted. They ended up having dinner at a fancy restaurant, the kind of place where a single meal could cost more than some people earned in a month. He told her he wanted her to be the last woman in his life. "I want to color your life pink," he reportedly said. "Will you be my final woman?" For Saki, this seemed like an incredible opportunity. Here was a wealthy man, willing to shower her with money and gifts, asking for very little in return. She agreed to marry him, and on the 8th of February, 2018, they got married. The marriage took place on a Butsumetsu day, considered the unluckiest day for special occasions according to Japan's traditional lunar calendar. But Kosuke wasn't bothered by this. Everyone at the ceremony seemed happy for them, at least outwardly. Social media showed them smiling together. Their life together was one of convenience and luxury. Saki didn't involve herself with cooking, cleaning, or day-to-day domestic tasks, and Kosuke seemed content to provide for her lifestyle. Part of this arrangement included a monthly allowance of around 1 million yen, ensuring that she could live comfortably without any financial concerns. However, the marriage hit a rough patch just a few months in. Kosuke began considering divorce. He became increasingly unhappy in his marriage to Saki Sudo. He felt that Saki showed little interest in caring for him as her husband, or even treating him with basic consideration. Small things started to bother him, the kind of details that reveal how someone really feels about you. When they went out to eat, she would often enter the restaurant without helping him from the car, leaving him to struggle on his own despite his age. Additionally, Kosuke noticed that when Saki purchased cakes and high-quality steaks from the supermarket, she kept these for herself, never thinking to share them with him. It was as if they were roommates rather than husband and wife. But it wasn't just her behavior that unsettled him. As his frustration grew, Kosuke learned something about Saki's past that made everything worse. Before they had ever met, she had appeared in several adult videos. For a man who openly bragged about giving money to thousands of women in exchange for pleasure, this was somehow a line he wouldn't cross. He couldn't accept that his wife had done this kind of work. It made him feel betrayed, and convinced him more than ever that marrying her had been a mistake. In March 2018, just over a month after the wedding, Kosuke served Saki with divorce papers. On May 6, 2018, just 3 months after their wedding, around the same time, something else happened that would later seem significant. On the 6th of May, 2018, Kosuke found that his dog, Eve, wasn't feeling well. This was alarming because she had seemed perfectly fine the day before, energetic and happy as always. He didn't have much time to think it over. He needed to rush her to the veterinarian immediately. Tragically, Eve didn't make it. Kosuke was left holding her as she died. Kosuke was devastated. He had loved Eve more than he had loved most people in his life. He planned a funeral for Eve, scheduled for the 25th of May. He wanted to give her a proper send-off. Friends who knew him said that with Eve gone, and with his latest marriage falling apart, Kosuke seemed more alone than he had ever been. On the evening of the 24th of May, 2018, Kosuke was at home in Tanabe. Saki was there as well, which was unusual. She rarely visited, and when she did, it was often to collect her allowance or to argue with Kosuke about the divorce. Around the middle of the day, they heard a thump from upstairs where Kosuke had been resting. The maid thought they should check on him immediately. After all, he was an elderly man. But Saki was indifferent, dismissive even. "Let's just leave him," she said. "He's probably just upset." The maid wasn't sure, but Saki was the wife, so she went along with her decision. As the evening went on, Kosuke didn't show up for dinner. The house remained quiet. By 10 o'clock at night, there had been total silence from upstairs for hours. The maid started to worry seriously now. She convinced Saki to go check on him, perhaps appealing to her as his wife, the one who should be most concerned. They climbed the stairs together and entered the bedroom. That's when they found Kosuke collapsed on a sofa. He wasn't breathing. They called emergency services. But when the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Kosuke was dead. At first, everyone assumed he had died of natural causes. He was 77 years old, after all. It seemed plausible that his heart had simply given out. But then the autopsy results came back, and everything changed that he had died from a lethal dose of stimulants, drugs that had flooded his system and stopped his heart. While some initially speculated that grief over his dog might have led him to take his own life, that theory didn't gain much traction among those who knew him. Instead, people became intrigued by the possibility that someone might have killed him for his considerable wealth. The circumstances of his death raised several immediate mysteries. Firstly, Kosuke himself had stated clearly in his autobiography that he neither smoked nor used stimulants. He'd been vocal about avoiding such substances throughout his life. Regular use of these drugs wasn't evident in his lifestyle or habits. Hair tests, which can detect long-term stimulant use going back months, showed no traces of these substances in Kosuke's body. This wasn't a man who had secretly been using drugs. Moreover, there were no needle marks on his body, which meant the drugs had been ingested orally, likely mixed into food or drink. This became massive news across Japan. CCTV footage showed that the only people in the house that day were Kosuke, Saki, and the maid. No one else had come in or gone out. Detectives searched the house and found traces of stimulant drugs on the kitchen floor. They examined Saki's smartphone and discovered that in the weeks before Kosuke's death, she had been searching for information online. The search terms were chilling. Perfect crime. Elderly death. Stimulant overdose. Text of a will if you want to leave all your assets to your wife. Saki had also been in contact with a drug dealer. Phone records and location data showed that she had met with this person shortly before Kosuke died. She had ordered more than 3 grams of methamphetamine, well over 3 times the lethal dose. Despite all this, the police did not arrest Saki immediately. The case was complex, and they needed to be certain. In Japan, prosecutors have a conviction rate of over 99%, because they only bring cases to trial when they are confident of winning. The authorities spent nearly 3 years building their case against Saki. At Kosuke's funeral, she was allegedly seen smiling and absorbed in her smartphone, as if she had somewhere else she'd rather be. She seemed unfazed by the solemnity of the occasion, even as the media swarmed around her with pointed questions. Reporters asked directly whether she had been after Kosuke's wealth, especially given their troubled marriage and his apparent plans for divorce. Saki was visibly annoyed by these accusations, defensive and dismissive. She claimed boldly that she was entitled to half of Kosuke's inheritance as his legal wife. Kosuke's family immediately contested this claim. But Saki wasn't the only suspect in the case. The police also had their eyes on the housekeeper, a woman who had been working for Kosuke for 30 years and was present in the house when his body was discovered. There was information from a close family aide who mentioned that the housekeeper used to talk about how Kosuke had promised her a significant amount of money after his passing. But there was nothing about this promise in his will, no legal documentation to support her claim. However, after Kosuke died, Saki unexpectedly mentioned that the housekeeper was entitled to a portion of his money. She said she'd heard Kosuke mention it, though no one else seemed to recall such a conversation. Based on this, some of Kosuke's close associates suggested that maybe Saki was trying to form an alliance with the housekeeper, working together to secure pieces of Kosuke's considerable wealth. But none of these speculations were backed up with concrete evidence that could lead to arrests. During that time, Saki remained free. She returned to Tokyo and continued posting on social media, sharing photos of herself enjoying life. Some reports suggested she was planning to move abroad, perhaps to Dubai, to escape the investigation. Then, in January 2021, an internal police report was leaked to the press. The leak created public pressure to make an arrest. On the 28th of April, 2021, nearly 3 years after Kosuke's death, police finally took Saki into custody. She was arrested on suspicion of murder and violating Japan's stimulant drug control law. She was 25 years old. The case attracted enormous media attention. Reporters surrounded her, asking questions, but Saki remained silent. Complicating the case further were allegations that Saki had been conspiring with the Yakuza, potentially as part of a plan to acquire Kosuke's inheritance. She was also accused of attempting to embezzle funds from his company, though these charges were later dismissed. When police moved in to detain her, Saki was apprehended in an apartment in Tokyo's Shinagawa ward and then flown to Nankishirahama Airport before being transferred to the Tanabe police station for questioning. Authorities also linked her to a separate fraud scheme in Sapporo, where she was accused of defrauding elderly victims of approximately 60 million yen. These allegations, though not directly tied to Kosuke's death, painted a far more complex portrait of Saki Sudo than the one initially presented to the public. Saki was held in detention for 23 days before being formally indicted. Under Japanese law, that was the maximum time she could be held without charge. On the 19th of May, 2021, prosecutors officially charged her with murder. They argued that Saki had married Kosuke for his money, and when he tried to divorce her, she had killed him to secure her inheritance through what she hoped would be the perfect crime. The trial did not begin until September 2024, more than 6 years after Kosuke's death. The delay was partly because Saki continued to deny the charges and refused to cooperate with investigators. Throughout the pretrial proceedings, she maintained her innocence. When the trial finally opened, Saki spoke publicly for the first time. "I did not kill him," she said. "I did not give him stimulants. I am innocent. She admitted that she had bought drugs, but claimed that Kosuke had asked her to do so. She said he had wanted to try them, and that she had purchased what she thought were amphetamines from someone on the street. But when she gave them to Kosuke, she claimed, he became angry because the drugs turned out to be fake. She said they never spoke about stimulants again. As for the internet searches, Saki insisted they had been done out of curiosity, nothing more. She said she often searched for random things online, and that it didn't mean she was planning anything. The prosecution argued that this was absurd. They presented 28 witnesses, an unusually high number, trying to prove that Saki had the motive, means, and opportunity to kill her husband. But the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. There were no witnesses to the actual crime. No one had seen Saki give Kosuke the drugs. The prosecution couldn't even prove definitively that the drugs Saki had purchased were the same ones that killed Kosuke. There was no physical evidence directly linking her to the murder. The presiding judge spent months reviewing the evidence. The trial dragged on through the autumn of 2024. Finally, on the 12th of December, 2024, the Judge Fukushima delivered her verdict. Saki Sudo was found not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Saki, who had maintained her composure throughout the trial, showed little emotion. Judge Fukushima explained her reasoning. She acknowledged that the case was suspicious, but said there was not enough evidence to infer beyond a reasonable doubt that Saki had murdered Kosuke. In other words, while everything looked suspicious, suspicion was not enough for a conviction. The prosecution had failed to prove its case. Saki walked free. Saki Sudo became one of the 0.1% of criminal defendants in Japan who are acquitted. For Kosuke Nozaki's family and friends, the verdict was devastating. They were certain that Saki had killed him, and now she would face no consequences. They had waited more than 6 years for justice, and in the end there was none. As for Kosuke's estate, that too became a source of controversy. In his will, he had expressed a desire to donate 1.3 billion yen to the city of Tanabe. But under Japanese civil law, half of his estate was supposed to go to his widow. After years of legal wrangling, the courts eventually ruled that Kosuke's will was valid, and the money would go to the city. Saki received nothing.